So, take a look at Galveston, Texas. When you see it, you see a vibrant coastal city, right? It's famous for that Victorian charm and all those miles of sunny beaches. Millions of people visit every year, and it looks solid, it looks permanent. But here's the crazy part. What if I told you that the very ground beneath these streets isn't the original island? What if I told you this entire city is standing on the unmarked graves and scattered ashes of thousands and thousands of people? And no, this isn't some ghost story. This is the real terrifying story of how America's deadliest disaster was literally buried, and how a city was raised from the dead. A story of absolute horror, unbelievable ingenuity, and a past that a city chose to build on top of, both literally and figuratively. You won't believe how they pulled this off. It's hard to imagine now, but before the storm, Galveston was the future. Seriously, at the turn of the 20th century, people called it the Wall Street of the South and the Queen City of the Gulf. It was a powerhouse. It had more millionaires per capita than almost any other city in America, and it was a huge port for immigrants, kind of like an Ellis Island for the West. By 1900, the city was booming with nearly 38,000 people. But there was a huge problem, a fatal flaw hiding in plain sight. The city was built on a low-lying barrier island, and its highest point was less than 9 feet above sea level. Now residents were used to what they called overflows, basically high tides spilling into the streets. But nobody, and I mean nobody, was ready for what was coming. On September 8th, 1900, a day that started with some unsettling rain, a catastrophic hurricane just slammed into the island. You have to remember, forecasting back then was basically guesswork. Ships at sea had no way to radio for help, and the weather guys on the island just tragically underestimated how powerful the storm was. This wasn't just a storm. It was a full-blown apocalypse of wind and water. Winds were screaming at over 130 miles per hour, but believe it or not, the wind wasn't the main killer. No, the real weapon was a storm surge, a wall of water over 15 feet high that just erased everything it touched. Entire blocks of homes were just ripped from their foundations. Buildings that had stood for decades were smashed into splinters, and that debris became a deadly battering ram in the floodwaters. One survivor said they heard houses crashing all around them, and the only thing louder was the screaming. When the sun came up the next day, the city was just gone. A wasteland of splintered wood, mud, and bodies. Bodies were everywhere. The official death toll was around 8,000, but some people think it was as high as 12,000. To this day, it's still the deadliest natural disaster in U.S. history. Can you imagine? The survivors woke up to this beautiful, calm sea that gave no hint of the horror it had unleashed just hours before. The devastation was absolute. A third of the city was completely obliterated. More than 3,600 homes gone, leaving about 10,000 people homeless. But the most immediate, most horrific crisis? It was all of the dead. Thousands of bodies were just laying in the wreckage and washing up on shore. Dealing with them was a total nightmare. So at first, the city leaders tried burials at sea. They loaded up barges with hundreds of bodies and took them out into the Gulf. But the Gulf refused to keep them. Days later, the currents washed hundreds of corpses right back onto the beaches. It was an unspeakable scene and massive health crisis waiting to happen. They couldn't bury them. The island's water table was too high, so a truly grim decision was made. The city's leaders took control. With armed guards patrolling the streets, men, especially African Americans, were forced at gunpoint into dead gangs to collect the bodies of their own neighbors, friends, and family. Then, all across the city, they built these giant funeral pyres from the debris of the homes. For weeks, the sky over Galveston was black with smoke as thousands of victims were cremated right where they lay. The smell must have been unimaginable. The ashes of the dead just settled over everything, mixing with the sand and the mud. So it wasn't one single mass grave. The entire ruined city became the final resting place for thousands. Hey, just a quick pause. If you're finding this hidden piece of history as insane and fascinating as I do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe. It really does help us uncover more of these forgotten stories. Alright, back to it. So faced with total ruin, most people thought Galveston was finished. I mean, the logical move was just to abandon the island. But the survivors refused. They were going to rebuild, but they knew they couldn't just rebuild the same city again. This time they had to stop the sea itself. And what they came up with has to be one of the most ambitious and frankly insane-sounding engineering projects in American history. It was a two-part plan. First, they would build a massive seawall. They got a board of expert engineers who designed this concrete barrier that would be 17 feet tall. Construction started in 1902, and by 1904, the first 3-mile section was done. This was the city's new shield. But a shield wasn't enough. A wall can block a surge, but the city behind it is still at sea level. So they started part 2 of the plan. They decided to raise the entire city. This is the part that sounds complete fiction. From 1903 to 1911, the city started this massive grade raising project. They worked in sections, building a dike around a neighborhood, and then lifting everything inside it. And we're not talking about small houses. They lifted over 2,100 buildings, including a 3,000-ton St. Patrick's Church. A 3,000-ton church. Workers used thousands of hand-turned jackscrews, painstakingly lifting everything. Buildings, sidewalks, water pipes, inch by inch. And get this, people actually kept living in their homes while they were perched up on stilts, using these elevated wooden walkways to get around. Once a section was lifted up, they dredged a canal to bring in ships that pumped a slurry of sand and water into the empty space below. In total, they raised about 500 city blocks, jacking up the ground level as much as 17 feet near the seawall. They pumped in over 16 million cubic yards of sand to create a new ground that Galveston would be built on. So that makes you wonder, right? With a story this dramatic, this story of destruction and an almost unbelievable rebirth, why does the Galveston hurricane of 1900 feel like a footnote in history? Well, the answer, like it most often is, comes down to money and power. The hurricane didn't just destroy Galveston, it terrified investors. The idea of building a commercial empire on such a vulnerable island suddenly seemed like a really bad bet. Meanwhile, just 50 miles inland, the city of Houston saw its chance. Houston was already a big rail hub, and when the Spindletop oil gusher erupted in 1901, just months after the storm, it basically sealed Houston's future. All the money, the oil, and the confidence flowed inland, and the Houston Ship Channel became the new economic heart of the region. So it's not like there was some big conspiracy to cover up Galveston's story. It was just overshadowed. In its heroic effort to rebuild, the city itself wanted to focus on the story of resilience and engineering genius. The seawall and the grade raising became these symbols of strength, a story to reassure people and investors. The more gruesome details, the funeral pyres, the bodies washed ashore, the sheer scale of loss, that was a past the city wanted to literally build on top of. As decades passed, Houston boomed, and Galveston's national importance faded. Its most tragic story just faded along with it. Today, if you walk the streets of Galveston, you can see the evidence of this incredible past, if you know where to look. You can see that mighty seawall, which is now over 10 miles long, still holding back the Gulf. You can stand in front of historic homes and see these markers showing where the original ground level was, sometimes a full story below where you're standing. The response to the 1900 storm was a breathtaking feat of human will, an engineering marvel born of America's deadliest disaster. But it's also a powerful reminder that the most incredible stories are sometimes the ones the city chooses to bury and then build upon. The ground beneath our feet almost always has a story to tell. We just have to be willing to listen. There are forgotten histories like this all around us. If you want to uncover more of them, let us know in the comments which hidden story we should tell next. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications so you can be the first to know when we tell the next story. Thanks for watching.